you miss me? I've been out of it comatose, but the depression is over.
Hello and welcome to Controlled Burns, the hobby list podcast for me, your host, Andrew Burns, or Slow Burn from Wildfire Gaming. We are officially back to our regularly scheduled program after several months of our audiobook side quest, where I recorded all of A Tale of Blood and Sweat Socks by McFoley and read it on air. And it was a fun experiment. I really enjoyed it. It got me to read that book again, which I have not had not read for probably a decade or so. And it kind of re-cemented it as one of my favorite books of all time. It allowed me to introduce my wife to it, and then since then I've introduced her to the world of wrestling a little bit, which I'm not really super engaged with in terms of what's going on in the modern sense, but like I grew up with it, and so I have nostalgia for some of the old stuff, and so that's kind of what I've been able to show her, and you know. Hit and miss. She's critical of it, but she also I think has gotten a little bit of something out of it. So at least she sort of understands what it was that I enjoyed about it when I was growing up. And so, and just introduce her and maybe perhaps some of you, if you're listening now, to the story of Mick Foley, which I think is a really great story of humanity. So that is the end of that. We don't have any plans to do any further audiobooks at this time. Again, the only reason I did that one is just because there wasn't an audiobook for that book, and I was excited about introducing my wife to it during our travels. And so we are coming back to the regular edition of the podcast starting this week. And I wish I could say that it was on better circumstances, but the topic here today is actually pretty negative, and it is going over the top 10 reasons why PlayStation's move to kill physical media and essentially force buyers to participate in the digital storefront of the PlayStation Store is bad. It's bad just across the board. It's a really bad decision, particularly for the consumers. I think it's a bad decision for PlayStation as well, and we're going to get into all of that in this episode of the podcast. And this is not this isn't just me as someone saying like I'm not one of those people who only buys strictly physically. I do have some physical games. I have bought a number of physical games for the PlayStation 5, but I also have bought a lot of digital games for the PlayStation 5 as well. Probably more digital games than physical, although I would be interested in actually getting the statistics there. It might be closer to half and half, actually. But regardless, I'm definitely not one of those like only physical people, but this goes much deeper than that, why this is a really bad, potentially cascadingly dire decision by this very, very stupid corporation that is getting worse and worse by the day. So that is what we're going to be going into on this episode of the podcast. If you enjoy the show, remember you can write in to our email at controlledburnes with an es at gmail.com. And remember, you can review, like, share the podcast wherever you listen to it. Okay, so going into a little bit of my history with PlayStation, just to sort of set the table on I guess my long history with them. The PlayStation was my first home console. My dad, who I would go over to see every other weekend, had a PlayStation. I think originally he actually had a Nintendo 64, but he either that's not true and I just imagine that, or he got rid of it and replaced it with a PlayStation. I'm pretty sure he did have one, and then he replaced it with a PlayStation. And this was a console that he bought for himself. He's probably I guess he's in his probably late 20s at this point, maybe even early 30s, slightly younger than I am now. I'm 31. And he bought the PlayStation for himself, and primarily he did use it for himself. He had Madden on it. He had Gran Turismo was a huge one. I mean, he played the hell out of Gran Turismo, which I think is still the best-selling game on the original PlayStation. And it was just very emblematic of how the PlayStation really expanded um, what it meant to be a gamer. There's a reason that it sold over 100 million units, which no video game console up to that point had ever accomplished before. And a big part of its success also was the fact that it used physical discs, CDs, as opposed to cartridges, which is what consoles used prior to that time for the most part, because it really lowered the production costs of producing those units. It allowed games to be sold more cheaply. It allowed them to be produced more cheaply. And as a result, more it opened the door for more developers to get involved in the industry and for more consumers to get involved with buying their work. And so it was a huge positive for the industry. And it led to explosive success for the PlayStation 1. And then, of course, the PlayStation 2 even outstripped that with over, well, I guess now they claim about 160 million units sold, the best selling video game console of all time. So, again, PlayStation was my dad's. I wasn't really that interested in it because, like I said, he was mostly playing Madden. He did have Gran Turismo, and I played that a little bit, although it was a little bit too complicated for me at the time. At this point, I'm probably 3 or 4, but very young. And then, he had like Star Wars Masters of Terrascasi when that came out, which was like this really bad Star Wars fighting game. It was something that he would play with his girlfriend at the time, and it was again, I couldn't really wrap my mind around it, but it was cool. I enjoyed. I thought it was a cool tech. At the time I was very interested in it. But what really put it over the edge was he bought a video game of A Bug's Life made by Traveler's Tales, I believe, and I was a huge Disney fan growing up. Just that, I mean, it was, if you grew up in the '90s, you probably were too, because they were just absolutely on fire with what they were producing at that time. It was clearly the golden age of Disney, and Pixar. Of course, I was a fan of Toy Story, and then their second movie was A Bug's Life, which came out in 1998 when I was 4, and I was obsessed with A Bug's Life. I was actually even more into A Bug's Life than I was Toy Story. I loved A Bug's Life, and here all of a sudden here was this game for it. And so you control Flick. It's sort of a 3D platform. It's not so much on the platforming really. It's really more of a, it's kind of hard to explain. It doesn't really fit with any genre conventions that what we see today. Closest approximation would be a 3D platformer, but it was very low on platforming. It was more about exploring the levels and sort of puzzling your way, I guess, to the end. But also you had to fight enemies, and it's almost like each level was like a mini, except for your new levels, was almost like each level was like a mini roguelike in a way, because it was like, yeah, at the beginning of each level you start at your base power, your base like attack, and you don't have anything. You collect things in the level to sort of almost level yourself up in a way, even though it's not, they didn't call it that. But like you upgrade your attack and you upgrade your abilities to sort of maneuver through the levels. And then by the end of each level, you kind of have mastery over the level and you've explored everything, you collected everything. It's actually a pretty good loop. It's not like an amazing game today. When you go back to it, it's pretty clunky in terms of the controls. Obviously, it looks pretty rough because it's a PlayStation 1 game, but it actually was pretty well made. Really great soundtrack. But I think well designed as well. Just some of the limitations of the hardware of the PlayStation at the time, and probably the relative inexperience of that developer at that time. They've since gone on to, now they're the main developer of like the Lego games, so that's pretty much all they do these days, I think. But they were pretty heavily tied to the Disney stuff in the '90s, and then they advanced to, I know they did that the first Crash Bandicoot game on the PlayStation 2, which I also had. But yeah, it was a really fun game. But for me, it was a mind blowing game because it was the first time that I was really interested in video games. And it was something that I was interested in already, obviously, A Bug's Life. Suddenly on the screen, here I was controlling Flick, doing these levels, and it was a communal experience between me and my dad and his girlfriend as well, because we would each sort of, I think all of us could get to like level 4 without any problem. There's 15 levels in the game, but then like level 4 was like a kind of a big difficulty curve because you had to basically have this dandelion that you would ride on to get across this chasm. But if you didn't get across the chasm, you would get insta killed by this bird. So we couldn't figure out how to do that. We couldn't figure out how to get across this chasm. And then eventually, my dad did figure out how to get across the chasm. And or maybe it was me. One of us figured out how to get across it. It was like, oh my gosh, we can actually continue with the game. And then the next level was really tough, where it's like this gigantic maze, and we had to figure out how to get through this gigantic maze. And none of us like had the probably the patience or just the intelligence to figure out how to get through it. And then finally, his girlfriend made it to the end. And it was like, okay, great. Now we can move on to the next level. The next level is a boss fight with that bird. It was like, oh Jesus, how are we gonna be able to beat this bird? And it was a long time trying to figure out how to do that. And then one of us figured that out. And then we continued in advance. And it was like every, you know, session or so, or every time I would remember, I go over there every 2 weeks. It was like we would make a little bit of progress, make a little bit of progress, and so eventually, of course, we finished the game. But it took a long time, and it was like a combined effort. It was a really unique experience that I think would be really kind of an amazing experience that I think brought us all together. And it would be great to sort of maybe be able to replicate that someday with my own children if I have them. But anyway, so that was a sort of a game changer, if you will, for me in terms of my interest in video games, and it made me realize how fantastic they can be, not just in terms of how fun they are, but also just in terms of bringing a family together. And so that was the first big one, but it was still something that I just did whenever I went over to my dad. So like he got that. I think the year after that he got the game for Star Wars Phantom Menace, which was coming out at the time. So that was another big project for us. We never actually finished that game, but that was one that we sort of similarly worked on together. And so it was something that I would play when I would go over there. I didn't have a PlayStation in my own home where I spent obviously the majority of my time at my mom's house. And then I went to school, right? And before I went to school, I was in preschool, which was there was this thing that my mom was a teacher. There was this thing that they called the Life Center, where uh, the children of teachers would go um, during the school year, but also like in the summer, right before when they were having to go back to school, and it was essentially like childcare, but I think there was some educational element to it. I don't know. I don't really remember that much about learning much in there, to be honest. But we certainly had activities. Anyway, I met this a friend there who was my first best friend. His name was Cade Spear, and we really hit it off at that time. But then around the time that we were going to kindergarten, um, he we were with our mom. So our moms worked in the same schools, Leonard Elementary School, where I grew up in Leonard, Texas, a small rural town. And there were these in the 90s. There were these every once in a while, a teacher would need to show the class something on a television. Well, the way that they did that at the time, remember televisions in the 90s were these big sort of picture tubes, and they were very large and very heavy. Is they was like I don't know if they kept them in like the computer lab, or they kept somewhere in some closet, I guess. They kept a few of these gigantic televisions that were on sort of strapped to these rolling um, devices, I guess, for lack of a better term, but these rolling things. Okay, and so like you would roll them to whatever classroom needed the TV, plug it up, and there you go. And then when you're done with it, they would plug it, roll it back to whatever closet it came out of. Well, the school year hadn't started yet, but our moms, me and Kate's moms, had to be at the school because it's something that the teachers do, and they have to go to school a little bit before the students to kind of get everything ready for when the students get there. Especially important for elementary school students. Well, he was like, well, I have a PlayStation. I'm gonna roll one of those TVs down here to my mom's classroom. She was like, right at the very end of the school, and let's play some PlayStation games. And I was like, oh, great, let's do it. And so the games that he had were games that I had were not like anything that I'd ever seen before. So like A Bug's Life, it was something that I was aware of from film that was made in game form, and I was so excited about that. Same thing for Star Wars: The Phantom Menace. Well, what he had was completely original properties. He had Spyro Year of the Dragon. So I guess we must have been like six at this time because game came out in 2000. He had Crash Team Racing. Those are the two that I remember in particular that he had. That both of which were mind blowing experiences for me because they were new. It was new characters. The gameplay was like way, way, way better and deeper than what I had experienced with Bug's Life. Because this is Insomniac and Naughty Dog, obviously, so some of the greatest developers of all time. And it really just kind of opened my eyes to wow. So video games can be more than just stuff that like basically properties from other places, from movies and things like that. There's original ideas in video games. And it was also there was a those two games were big in terms of expanding what I could understood a video game could be as well. Because at this point I knew there's racing, there's sports, there's movie tie-ins. Well, here was a kart racer, was similar in a way to Gran Turismo, but it was a lot more arcadey and it had weapons and it was a lot more cartoony, obviously more appealing to a kid like me, much less realistic, obviously, a realistic racing sim with these cartoon characters. And I was like, well, that's awesome. Really loved that. And then there was Spyro Year the Dragon, which I still think is a masterpiece in game design because it has like the typical Spyro running around collectathon platforming, but then it also has like the top-down shooter levels with Sparks, was like my first exposure to an arcade shooter like that. And I remember we just thought that was so cool, and we play that over and over. And then they had like the full flight missions with the penguin, and then they had like the third person shooter element with the monkey. And so like they kind of combined all these different elements. They had the skateboarding, which was of course very popular at the time. And so they kind of combined all these different elements into one game. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. There's all these different things that you can do in the game. And that was the one where I was like, I got to get a PlayStation like at home, but for me, not just like relying on what my dad has. And remember, this is 2000 or 2001. I think when I finally got it was for my seventh birthday, which was actually 2001. So at this point, the PlayStation 2 is out, but I wasn't plugged into the news or anything. Like I didn't know that. I saw what somebody presented in front of me, which was a PlayStation playing Crash Team Racing, Inspire Year of the Dragon, and I was like, I want that. And he had a lot of other games too. And I go over to his house and play other things. I remember Croc, Legend of the Gobos was one. He definitely had the Tony Hawk games. There was just like a lot of stuff that he was exposing me to, and I just did not know. And so he was sort of my first gaming outlet in a way, because he was sort of showing me like what games were cool, and he was a humongous influence on the games that I got early on in my life, because I was like, well, I want the stuff that he has because they're freaking awesome. So yes, I got my first PlayStation for myself uh, at my seventh birthday, 2001. I think it was my seventh birthday. It was either my sixth or my seventh. It's possible that it was my sixth, but that would have put it in 2000. Either way, I know Spyro Year of the Dragon was out. That was the first game that I really wanted, and that game came out in 2000. More likely it was 2001. No, it was seven because I think it came out later in 2000. My birthday's in March, so it must have been my seventh birthday. So yes, PlayStation 2 was out, but I didn't know that. So, PlayStation 1 was my first big console. Now, I had the Game Boy and stuff playing Pokemon, of course, at this time as well. But this was my first home console connected to the TV. And it was a game changer for my life. And it became my number one hobby, quickly eclipsed, watching Disney movies and things of that nature, which, was kind of a disappointment for my mom, I think. But it also was a key vehicle in sort of bringing me together with my friends at school, but also to other people in my family. My cousin Brett, my brother Brandon. Still, Brandon comes over every Monday, and we play games together. Still to this day. And similar for Brett, he's a little busier. Don't see him quite as much as I wish I could, but when he comes over, we still play games together as well. So, it was a sort of a bonding thing for our family. And so that was sort of my history with the PlayStation. It was huge. It was a life-changing device for me. And then of course the PlayStation 2 came out, and that was similar, but obviously better, because the PlayStation 2 is such a legendary console in terms of the amount of games on it. It completely was backward compatible with my PlayStation 1 as well, so I still was able to play PlayStation 1 games on it, which I did. I played plenty of PlayStation 1 games on my PlayStation 2, and it sort of uh, I guess, sort of entrenched in me the importance of backward compatibility, which I didn't even understand was sort of a novel concept at that time. I was like, yeah, of course, you want to be able to play your old games too. Like, I'm not going to give up what I grew up with, like the games that I played previously, just for the new thing. And so that was something that I never did. I think for a lot of people that are older than me, and even younger than me, perhaps, that did do that, like they trade in their stuff and then they would put that toward getting the new thing. And I did that a little at GameStop. I would trade in the stuff that I really didn't care that much about. And I even still kind of regret that I even did that, because, it's just kind of a shame that I've lost little pieces of my gaming history, even if it was games that really weren't very good. I never traded in something that I was really attached to, of course. Um, but yeah, it was always important to me to be able to keep what I had before and build on top of that if I was going to buy something new. And that was certainly sort of, I guess, entrenched in me with the PlayStation 2 and with the Game Boy as well, because we went from the Game Boy to the Game Boy Color to the Game Boy Advance, and it was backward compatible across all of those. So it was just like, yeah, of course, when you buy a new console, you still have what came before. That was sort of just my mindset with gaming, thanks to that bridge there. So PlayStation 2 was probably the console that I spent the most time with. Certainly the console I spent the most time with as a child. So let's say I got it in like 02, 03. probably '02, late '02, early '03. And that was my main console really until '02, '03. I'm 8 or 9. It's really my main console until I bought a PlayStation 3. It's a slim, so it was '09 at the earliest. Um, Probably around that period, '09, 10. But it's still because it wasn't backward compatible with the PlayStation 2. It actually was backward compatible with the PlayStation 1, but I didn't realize that. It was not well telegraphed to me. And so for like the longest time, I think I was in college when I finally figured out. I might have even been graduated from college when I finally figured out that, oh my God, you can put a PlayStation 1 disc in this PlayStation 3 and it'll work. And it's way better than the PlayStation than doing it on the PlayStation 2 because you don't have to worry about memory cards and I don't know, the stuff that wouldn't like it just reads discs better. The PlayStation 3, I guess, because it's a newer technology and better disc reader in it. And so, um, but so me not knowing that, PlayStation 2 is still my main console because it played all my PlayStation 2 games, which was my biggest library by far. It played all my PlayStation 1 games. And then PlayStation 3, there wasn't really anything that I was that interested in. The PlayStation 3 generation was a lot more about first person shooters. It was a lot more of a mature generation. My mom was very strict about what games I could have. And so um, I didn't really I couldn't really play a lot of the PlayStation 3 stuff. Like I played the teen rated games, so I played your Infamous, I played Uncharted 1. Liked them okay, but neither of them really stuck with me to the level like some of my favorite PlayStation and PlayStation 2 games had. There's nothing on the level of like a Spyro or a Jack and Daxter for me. And that didn't really change until I was like, getting into late high school, and that was whenever I finally was exposed to Fallout 3. And Fallout 3 was like that was my first big open world game like that. I'd played like your Jack and Daxters that were open world. I'd dabbled in Grand Theft Auto whenever I would go over to other people's houses. I couldn't own it myself, and it was okay, but it wasn't something that was I was really interested in at the time. But Fallout 3, I was mature enough and then also just engaged enough to where I was like, well, this is an amazing experience because it was like a super immersive game. It's first person. You just had this huge world to explore. You could literally go anywhere. It's an amazing design. Really, even to this day, I still think Fallout 3 is a masterpiece. And it was like that era of uh, Bethesda. I didn't still have to say I haven't played Oblivion, but Fallout 3 and then Skyrim and then Fallout 4 to a degree. Those were like they were really strong on their world design and their quest design kind of got worse and worse but the world design was always really strong, the atmosphere and things of that nature. So they was very good at that, and Fallout 3 was really good at that. And I actually was really engaged in the storytelling of Fallout 3 too, because this was a much more mature story than what I was used to at that time. I was still used to your E for everyone, T for teen games on the PlayStation 1 and 2, and so it was a big step up to go to this sort of important story and Fallout 3, like very grounded story of like we're trying to just survive, so we need water because you need water to survive. We need to purify this water that's been radiated. And so all that was really sort of to me like very thoughtful and profound even. Whereas now it's compared to like peak storytelling today Fallout 3 is fairly rudimentary, but I still think that it really can hit for you, and the way that my character ended up, it really hit for me. So I was really attached to that. And so that was a huge game changer for me, Fallout 3. So I was like, okay, so I really like this style of game. I played a ton of Fallout 3. Fallout New Vegas came out, played a ton of Fallout New Vegas. Skyrim came out, played a ton of Skyrim. And so those were basically the games that I was playing. So to the detriment of everything else, like in this period, I was obsessed with those kinds of games and Bethesda games specifically, and really not playing anything else, missing out on the Mass Effects, missing out on The Last of Us, and the journeys and the heavy rains, the things that you look back on the PlayStation 3 that make it a really special console. I was missing out on all that. I was going all in on Bethesda. And so it was when the PS4 came out, wasn't really that interested. I'm playing Sky. It's not backward compatible. I'm playing Skyrim. I'm playing Fallout 3 in New Vegas on my PlayStation 3. I don't need to go to the PlayStation 4. This is in my college days now. And then Fallout 4 is announced. It's a PlayStation 4 exclusive. Okay, great. I got to get a PlayStation 4. There was just no doubt about it. And so that was what I did. I went and got a PlayStation 4 the weekend before Fallout launched. Fallout 4 launched, went to the midnight release to get the game, and had an amazing time playing Fallout 4 for like the next 2 years and playing like basically nothing else. So that was, just a complete domination of my consoledom, I guess, my video game play. Finally, at about 2017, I graduated from college. I was working my first job out of college. I was like, I've spent my time in Fallout 4. I've spent hundreds and hundreds of hours playing Fallout 4. I think I'm kind of good. I've spent my time in Fallout 3. I've spent my time in New Vegas. I've spent my time in Skyrim. I've still gone back to those games here and there, especially Skyrim, since then. It's like I'm kind of ready for the next thing. So I go to GameStop and I see this advertisement for this game called The Witcher 3. And I was like, that looks fun. It's a open world game, kind of like Skyrim, but it looks really good. Looks much better than Skyrim. Let's try that. It's $50 here. It says it's the complete edition. It's got these DLCs in it. Whatever. Yeah, I'll take this. Well, that was a game changer as well because this is another. You think about the jump that I went from for like the PlayStation 2 suddenly going to Fallout 3. I was going from Fallout 4, which released in the same year as Witcher 3, but Witcher 3 is on such another level of Fallout 4 that it felt like another just monumental jump. And I was like, oh my God. So this is what side quest design can be. This is what visual design can be. This is what story and character development can be in a game. And it was a huge eye opener for me, game changer for me again. And so I was like, okay, I need to like look for other stuff like this. So next year, Red Dead 2 came out, played that, masterpiece. I got into the Mass Effect games at this time, played through those on my PlayStation 3 because they hadn't done the remastered collection yet. So I was going back to the PlayStation 3 to do that, which, incredible. I was getting into Final Fantasy at this time, never played the Final Fantasy games until Final Fantasy 7 in 2017 with my brother. Masterpiece, still my favorite game of all time. That's now my favorite franchise. So, intermittently I was playing Final Fantasy games like I never played before. So all these things together were sort of I had a very sort of I guess I kind of had a renaissance in the PlayStation 4 era, which it's not even the full PlayStation 4 era because I didn't get it until 2015. Really, I was only playing Fallout 4 until 2017. So it's 2017 and 2020. I'm having a huge renaissance period with video games. I'm working. I'm single for the vast majority of that time. I've got a lot of time on my hands. I'm playing all these new games I've never played before. 2020 was, of course, the peak of that because it was COVID. I am living in New Jersey at this point. My I have no other family there, no friends there outside of work, and I am not leaving my house except for like once a week to go to the grocery store once COVID hits. And so I am just gaming, 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 and having a great time. 2020 was like my year for games because I was playing like all the big stuff, all the new releases. Obviously, at the end of 2020, the PlayStation 5 comes out. No question, I'm buying it day one. I've never done this before for like a main console. You recall with PlayStation 1, I was a very late adopter. PlayStation 2, fairly early adopter, but just kind of more, certainly not in the first year, or probably not even the second year. Um, PlayStation 3, late adopter, probably adopted it around the middle. PlayStation 4 is the first half of the PS4 life cycle, but it still was, you know, nowhere near just like a day one purchase. PlayStation 5, no doubt I'm going to get a PlayStation 5 day one. There's a lot of reasons I think incentivizing me to do that. There's the PlayStation Plus collection where if you come in, you're going to get access to these 20 PS4 games. And, I had maybe half of them and half of them I didn't have. So that's a big incentive. They have a hell of a launch lineup for the PlayStation 5 with Spider-Man Miles Morales, Astrobot, Demon Souls, the that Sackboy game, and the Pathless. There was like a bunch of stuff that was releasing with the PlayStation 5 where I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. I'm interested in all these games. It's gonna be completely backward compatible with my PlayStation 4, so I'm gonna be able to carry everything forward just like I always wanted to from my childhood. And it's also going to come with way more storage than my PlayStation 4 has because my PS4 is just a 500 gig console, and I was constantly, particularly toward the end, having to like reshuffle the deck. I never got an expanded storage or anything on that. So I was like, well, that's huge. It's almost like having a better PS4 that has more storage, and I'll still have my PS4, if I ever need it, which I still do to this day. And so PS5 was an easy early adoption for me. And then the PlayStation 5 generation, so for me has been more positive than I think it has been for a lot of people. A lot of people have felt that their output has really diminished during the PlayStation 5 generation. That's definitely true. That is an objective fact. However, you still get everything else. It's still backward compatible with the PlayStation 4. And so the vast majority of the games that I played today are on the PlayStation 5. It's supplemented, of course, with my Switch. Now Switch 2, which I have. And then, over the years, I also had I just skipped the 360. I had the original Xbox, which I bought after the fact. And then Nintendo consoles I had basically from the GameCube. Well, I got the Nintendo 64 too, but it was like way after the fact. GameCube I had fairly early because it was so cheap. Wii I had fairly early because it was so new and unique. Actually had that one before the PlayStation 3. And then Wii U I skipped. Switch I got year or two after it launched. Switch 2 I got right at release. That's kind of my history with Nintendo. Now let's go to handheld. The PlayStation handhelds were never as big a deal for me as the Nintendo ones. I remember when the PSP was coming out. This is 11 in 2005. I'm really excited about this idea of having like essentially what is a PlayStation 2 wherever you want to go. And I already had so I grew up with the Game Boy, black and white. I graduated to Game Boy Color, graduated to Game Boy Advance SP. No, I had a Game Boy Advance first, then Game Boy Advance SP. Then I had a DS, and I remember the DS seemed like, wow, this is unbelievable to be able to play Super Mario 64 on the D, anywhere you want to go. That was such a mind-blowing thing to be able to have access to. Well, this PlayStation promised even more than that, the PSP. But for some reason, it never really clicked with me. I mean, I played, especially when I first got it, and I was a very early adopter of the PSP. I did play a lot of stuff on it, especially those early PSP games I had. I remember having Need for Speed Most Wanted. Is it Most Wanted? Whatever. I think no, it's not Most Wanted. Need for Speed Rivals, I think, was the kind of launch game with the Need for Speed. I really enjoyed Need for Speed Underground 2 on the PlayStation 2, so I that was an easy buy. I remember I had NFL Street Unleashed 2. I played on the PSP. Got Daxter when it came out, but didn't really click with me. I had Ratchet and Clank Size Matters, which I liked actually quite a bit, but I didn't spend a whole lot of time with it. These games that I was getting on the PSP just seemed like they weren't really sticking with me. They weren't as sticky as like a Pokemon game, where it's like a much longer term engagement. With the exception of SmackDown versus Raw 2006, this was my first sort of modern wrestling game. The only wrestling games I'd played before that were like on the Nintendo 64, and then I had SmackDown just bringing on the PlayStation 2, which was like the first PlayStation 2 wrestling game. So this was like the roster that I knew at that time because I started watching wrestling in 2005. And so it was like, here's Batista, here's John Cena, here's Shelton Benjamin and Ric Flair. I was like, okay, awesome. This is the people I know. So Shawn Michaels, Triple H, Kurt Angle. So I was like, okay, great. So I was really excited about that. But I had it on the PSP, so I played it all the time. That was the stickiest game for me on PSP by far. And so I played SmackDown vs. Raw 2006 that whole year on the PSP. It was like probably my most played game that year. But then after that, graduated in 2007. I got that on the PlayStation 2 instead of the PSP. So, um, I kind of moved beyond my wrestling, kind of went off of the PSP and on to the PS2 again. And so at that point, I kind of mostly left the PSP behind. I didn't really use it for a lot of things after that. And then the Vita, that was during the period where I had really gotten into Bethesda and was like, Vita can't do that. I don't even know if I knew that the Vita had launched, or if I did, I just didn't care. And so I wasn't interested in that. I bought the 3DS, which was actually a 2DS because it was the cheapest thing I could get to play Pokemon X and Y on, which I kept up with the Pokemon series through Sword and Shield, and then I kind of gave up after that. But 3DS era, I definitely was still keeping up with it, so I used it for Pokemon games, and that was basically it at that time. And then the Vita, I just wasn't interested in at all. Didn't get one. Finally, I did buy a Vita after it was basically a dead console. Whenever I was getting into sort of learning on YouTube, one of my favorite YouTubers is Mystic, who's a big PlayStation guy, and he was a big fan of the Vita. And I was like, there's a lot of cool stuff that I could play on my Vita. This is, 2000, or I'm sorry, 2020, probably 2019, 2020, around that period, if I had to guess, maybe even 2021. And I was like, this is, I'm interested in enough in the Vita where I'll buy a used Vita and put some stuff, buy some stuff on that. And I did. And I've spent some good time with my Vita and I've really enjoy what I played on it. I played a lot of God of War on it. Played God of War 1, 2, and the PSP. God of War's on there. I've played Ratchet and Clank 1 on there. I have the collection. I have played Jack and Daxter 1, which does not run well on the Vita, but I wanted to do it as part of my trying to get in the top 50 fastest platinum earners for that game, which I did. But I haven't played like a ton of Vita specific games because there really aren't a lot of Vita specific games. It ended up being a great indie machine, but not so, it was a failure, so PlayStation very quickly abandoned it. And so that's my kind of history with the handheld stuff, not as important for me as the console stuff historically. But now we get into you kind of understand my history with PlayStation. It's a huge part of my identity. It's been my number one video game platform since the 90s. Um, I really value the sort of variety of experiences you can have on PlayStation compared to Nintendo and Xbox. Thought their first party output has always been very strong, particularly in the PS4 era. But even the stuff that wasn't technically first party, but that was just exclusive in the PlayStation era. I mean, like so many of the best games were only on the PlayStation 1 and on the PlayStation 2 back in the day. PlayStation 3 less so, but because I had sort of came up with PlayStation, I didn't even really consider getting Xbox 360. Obviously, I could have been playing those Bethesda games on that and probably having a better time, but I ended up doing it on PlayStation 3 instead because that was just my loyalty to PlayStation at that point. And then PlayStation 4, I mean, I was obviously vindicated by that because PS4 totally destroyed Xbox One. And similar with PS5 versus Series X. And like I said, with PS5, I have not been disappointed. A lot of people have been disappointed this generation. I was an early day one adopter of the PlayStation 5. I do not regret that purchase at all. And I've had a great time with it. So, very positive on PlayStation coming into the last year or so. And then they start making these decisions that are just objectively bad decisions. This idea of investing in live service to the detriment of their single player stuff, disastrous decision that has harmed the brand in major ways and really cut down on the number of games that they've been able to deliver this generation. Closing of studios, like particularly Bluepoint most recently, that was like a devastating closure because I thought the Demon Souls remake was awesome. I loved the Shadow of the Colossus remake. As someone that played Shadow of the Colossus back on the PlayStation 2. And so these are clearly just bad decisions that are harming the brand. But because it's my main console, I'm able to play all the third party stuff. The console's still working for me. Square is putting a lot of good stuff out that I'm playing, and I got really into trophies starting in 2020 with the COVID period, and so like I enjoyed that aspect of it. So I'm enjoying like trophy hunting on PlayStation. So I'm still satisfied. But now they make the. However, I will say even before this, I was like PlayStation 6 though. I'm not so sure because the the transition from PS4 to PS5, they kept making PS4 games for such a long time. And even still, some games come out on PS4 still. Whereas like to me it was worth it because it felt like a huge upgrade over the PlayStation 4 at the time. For me, in terms of running at higher frame rates, but also more storage, still basically completely backward compatible with the PlayStation 4. So it's just like it's almost just like an upgrade for the PlayStation 4 for me. Which so I was happy with that. And there was perks for upgrading when I did, like the PlayStation Plus collection, getting in early on that PS5 lineup, the library. Well, PlayStation 6, I was like, God, they would really have to sell me on that because it's like, unless they come up with like some more great incentives like they did before, like the Plus collection, and they have like a really strong first party lineup like they did for the PlayStation 5, maybe, right? Then the AI thing happens where everything is going up in price, and they're starting to talk about a PlayStation 6 costing $1,000 or more than that. It's like, well, of course I'm out at that point, right? I mean, PlayStation. Well, most people will. People will obviously just kind of have to keep making it for the PlayStation 5. It's going to be cross gen, just like we saw before. I'll just stick with my PS5, I think. Then the bomb drops last week. PlayStation is killing physical games. So I'm furious by this decision. And not just because I like physical games. Obviously, a lot of my collection is physical because I've kept up with what I bought all the way back when I was in the 90s with the PlayStation 1 through the PlayStation 2, 3, 4. But a lot of the stuff, he's starting with the PS4, a lot of, Fallout 4 I bought physically, right? But a lot of the stuff on later on in the PS4, I did buy digitally, and same thing for the PlayStation 5. It was sort of a mix, kind of half and half, really. It's like if I got a better deal physical, I'd do that. If it was like I was just getting something on day one, I'd probably just go digital because then I could just download it and have it ready to go as soon as it releases. So yeah, that's kind of it's sort of a case by case basis. Of course, got games as gifts, so obviously those were physical. You can't gift games on the PlayStation Store. So I had a lot of physical stuff, but I had a lot of digital stuff too. But there's the more I thought about this um, decision to eliminate physical games, the more I realized that how much of a disastrous decision it is in a lot of different ways. So I've come up with a top 10 list. You know, I love lists on this show. Come up with a top 10 list of the reasons why this is a bad decision. Not just for us as consumers, although that's who I'm most concerned about, but also for, I think, PlayStation itself. So we're going to get into that right now. So generally, I did kind of try to order these in terms of how bad I think they are. So we're starting least bad and getting to most bad. Starting with number 10, I think, and this is sort of more bad for PlayStation and its studios than it is for the consumers. But if they're getting rid of physical games, right, that means that they're getting rid of their physical presence in stores, your Walmarts, your Targets, your Best Buys, stores that people go to for other things, maybe. And then they go down the aisle, like, oh yeah, there's some video game stuff here. Let's browse, shall we? And then of course, like your more video game specific stores, like your GameStops, which people see. You know, they're driving down the freeway, they see there's a GameStop. They're gonna lose that physical presence. There's no way you're gonna have these stores stocking PlayStation stuff if they're not gonna be selling discs. So that I think is gonna result in a loss of mind share over time, right? Because people they're not going to see them anymore. Therefore, they're not going to be as much of a presence. Not going to be as top of mind. They're going to be losing. You know, think about like with kids, right? Young kids, they go to the store and or their parents go to the store. They're looking for gifts for their kid. They're going to see PlayStation games. They're going to see other stuff. They're going to see the next whatever the hell playground thing that beat the Xbox in the sales, whatever quarter that was. They're going to see board games. They're going to see toys. They're going to see PlayStations. So over time, I think that this is almost certainly going to result in loss of sales. It's going to result in loss of mind share. It's going to result in loss of sales, and PlayStation as a whole will suffer. That's number 10. Number 9, um, I think that this will result in. Think about the whole complaint that people have had for the last Lord knows decade or more about how video games in their release today they're not finished, right? You're not getting a finished product. So you get stuff that's broken, you get stuff that's busted. You're paying a launch price for it, and it's not even like finished, and then they patch it later. But they're not like giving you back the time you wasted trying to play this inferior broken product, and sometimes maybe you lose your save or you lose um, your progress, and it's just like they don't care. Yeah, you've already got your money, right? Well, at least now they have some incentive to quote unquote finish games before they release because they have a version that's being locked on these physical discs. You take that away, you're removing even more incentive to quote unquote finish games before release. So expect more broken releases, buggy messes coming out at launch for the foreseeable future with no physical discs. Number 8, there's a lack of consumer rights on the PlayStation Store as it is today. Obviously, a big one is with your physical games. You can sell those games either at eBay or GameStop or whatever, just to people could trade them. One of the best trades I ever got in my life was I traded some old Yu-Gi-Oh cards from that I had from back when I was a kid to a friend in high school who was interested in them. He gave me Fallout New Vegas, the original Crash Bandicoot on PS1, and a big collector's edition New Vegas book that I still have to this day. It's like a guide, hardback cover, like really high quality. Which I got in New Vegas is one of my most played games ever. I got for nothing. I paid nothing for that. I just gave him some Yu-Gi-Oh cards I didn't give a shit about. So you lose that. And there's also no refunds on the PlayStation Store. Really. If you download a game, no refund for you, which is terrible anti-consumer policy. And totally counter to how it is in if you buy a physical game, even if you can't get a refund on it, which you probably can if you try to refund it fast enough. But if you don't, then you can still sell it and get something for it. Not so with the PlayStation going forward if it's all digital. And there's also no way to gift games on the PlayStation Store. So that's it for buying gifts for people. I still to this day buy games for my brother, and he buys games for me, and you lose that with the end of the PlayStation's with by locking people into the PlayStation Store. So that's a negative. Number seven, I call it the death of the backward compatibility dream. So maybe the PlayStation 6 will be backward compatible with the PS4 and PS5, right? That would be the bare minimum. But you lose the ability to. There's no way to, as it stands right now, to transfer your physical games that you've bought to digital versions so that you can continue to play them. So, like a lot of my favorite games, I would be unable to play on a PlayStation 6. My Octopath Traveler 2 copy, my Last of Us Part 2 copy. Um, Looking over here, my Red Dead 2, my Kingdom Hearts collection, Metaphor ReFantazio, The Witcher 3, Final Fantasy 7 Remake. These are all games that I have on physical Uncharted collection that I don't have digitally. Some maybe they'll give me some ways that I can make a digital version of it, but they have it to this day to up to now, and so there would be no way for me to play those on a PlayStation 6. So you're losing backward compatible functionality. And then think about this. Think about the dream of that we've always had. I remember uh, something that was talked about in the PlayStation 5 of like, man, imagine if with the PlayStation 5 you could just put a PlayStation 1 disc in there, or a PlayStation 2 disc, or a PlayStation 3 disc in there, and it would read and play it. And to this day, I can still put Xbox games or Xbox 360 games. I never even owned an Xbox 360, but I can buy an Xbox 360 game if it's on the backward compatibility list for the Xbox One, Series X, which not all of them are, but a lot of the major ones are. I could buy, and I've done this. I can buy an Xbox 360 game, a console I do not own, put it into my Xbox Series X. It will download an updated, higher quality version of it for me, and boom, I have it. You can't do that on the PlayStation 6, especially if there's no disc drive. Can't even do it on the PlayStation 5 with a disc drive. And just think about that. What if they did do that? That could have been a potential selling point, which they desperately need to get people on board for the PlayStation 6. What if their selling point was, all right, PlayStation 6, all your physical games that you've built up throughout your life, PS1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you put it in here, it works. That would have been a huge selling point, right? But that dream is dead with the death of physical media. Doesn't have a disk drive. There's no way that could be possible. The death of the backward compatibility dream. Number six, this whole idea of a fully digital console. I think for a lot of people, it's hard for them to sort of wrap their heads around this. But what that does is you are leaving people behind that have poor internet, particularly in smaller, so in rural areas, but also in other countries, smaller, less affluent countries. You go on the PlayStation 3, like the PlayStation 3 is extremely popular for in some of these other countries that don't have as good access to sort of modern releases. But they have the PlayStation 3, free online, um, cheap games, old hardware. They get on there and they still play them online to this day. You'll see a lot of sort of foreign people playing what limited PlayStation 3 games you can still play online with. Um, for me, I can say from my own experience, I didn't have Wi-Fi in my home growing up. I don't know if I had Wi-Fi until I graduated from high school, which was in 2012. My PlayStation 3 did not have a PlayStation account associated with it until 2013. I think was whenever I finally set one up. That's the year the PlayStation 4 launched. I never purchased anything online. Didn't even go on the PlayStation Store before that. And I lived in a rural area, and there's still a lot of those areas where you can get internet for sure, but it's like it might not be very good. Certainly not good enough to download a whole Call of Duty or a whole Grand Theft Auto 6 with any sort of convenience. So at that point, why do those people even bother? If it's like my experience on this console is gonna suck ass, Well, why don't I just stick with what I already have? I'll just stick with PS5. What did Don Matrix say? Fortunately, we have a console for people who they're not always connected online. It's called Xbox 360. Well, that's basically what PlayStation is saying here. Fortunately, we have a console for people who, want to access to physical games and maybe not don't want to have to download everything. It's called PlayStation 5 or PlayStation 4. So you're losing sales on that. You're leaving people behind that otherwise might have been interested in your console. And number five kind of folds into that as well. This move, make no mistake, will kill entire businesses. Thousands of people will lose their jobs because of this decision. Not only could that be the case with the manufacturing of the disc, I understand that they right now they're saying that they're transitioning people that are making discs to manufacturing other things. So maybe that's okay. Maybe we don't lose anything there, but we're certainly losing GameStop. There's no way GameStop survives if both PlayStation and Xbox move forward and they do not have physical discs. GameStop is dead. It's already been struggling for years. It's been held on by a lifeline. We're losing GameStop. We're losing also some of those more boutique publishers who their whole identity is making physical games. Your limited runs, your I am 8-bits, companies like that that you know employ and serve a key market of the business. It's just going to be gone. It's just dead. It's not even, and it's not by anything that they did wrong. If a company dies, like GameStop, for instance, if GameStop died because they made bad decisions, which they've made many, it's like, well, they made bad decisions. What are you going to do? But here you have businesses completely being killed based on nothing that they did. They did nothing wrong. It's just a bigger company is stepping down on them. Like we feel like we can make a little bit more money, which I think they're wrong about. We're going to get into that in a second. If we kill this off, so that hurts you. Too bad. We don't give a shit. It's terrible business in terms of just the goodwill of the market. I think terrible business long term as well, which we're going to get into. But even if it's not, just the morality of killing businesses, killing livelihoods for what? To line your pockets a little more. It's a big negative. Number four, I've kind of touched on this already, but going to digital only is going to severely limit players' ability to share games with others. I already talked about how I still to this day buy gifts for my brother that are PlayStation games or Nintendo Switch games. I guess he's going to get a lot more of those going forward. Um, and he's able to buy that or play those, or like my wife. Maybe we have one copy of a game in the household, right? But she can play it on her profile. I can play it on my profile. We do that with some games on the Switch, which Nintendo smartly realized this issue, and so they created the key card system where you can share games, even digital games, with other people. Like, okay, you want to play this, so you can borrow it on your profile for a couple weeks at a time. That's a very smart decision by Nintendo, and PlayStation has made nothing similar. But even not buying, like my cousin Brett, before his PlayStation 5, he's had a lot of issues with his PS5, so it doesn't even his disk drive doesn't even work anymore. But when it did, I remember lending him some copies of things. Like I lent him Spider-Man Miles Morales when it came out. He didn't have to buy Spider-Man Miles Morales, but he did play it because he was able to play my copy. Kind of goes back to that whole PlayStation thing when they dropped the hammer on Xbox at the in 2013. Like, this is how you share games on PS4. You hand it over, which you couldn't do on Xbox One with the way that they were setting that console up. And that was a huge dunk at the time. And it's like people, I see the argument people say was like, well, yeah, of course, PlayStation wants to tamp down on that. They don't want there to be a secondary market. They don't want you to be able to share games with others. Well, I got news for you. um, Consumers are not required to buy your console. If you're coming out with a PlayStation 6, that doesn't mean we have to buy it. Even if we're someone like me, I bought every PlayStation console literally that's ever existed. You think that you're gonna take incentives away from me to buy your hardware, and I'm still gonna do it at double the price? I got news for you, Jack. It's not gonna happen that way. You have to incentivize people. You have to give people perks to buy your console, especially if it's gonna be expensive. You better be enumerating the perks for why you could buy your console. Yeah, you can share games on our console. Yeah, you can buy your games wherever you want, as long as you're playing them on our console. Well, they're going the opposite direction, and I think that's going to spell disaster for them and for the people who get on there. They're going to be a lot more limited in what they can do. They're not going to be able to. They're going to have to buy everything. They're not going to be able to borrow a game from a friend. They're not going to be able to get a game as a gift. It's all going to be up to them and their wallet, putting all the strain. That's number four. Number three. This is a big one that you hear people being bandied about today. Number three, physical games offer better preservation. So this is it kind of goes in hand with the number what I put as number two, but um, so this idea that if it's a physical game, it's got a more likelihood of being preserved and surviving. And I see people say like, oh, well, that's not really true. Um, but just think about it. Think about how many games are delisted today. Like Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker I just found out the other day. You can't go on the PS3 store or the Vita store. I guess it was a Vita game and buy, or is it a PSP game? Maybe? You can't. But anyway, you can't buy Peace Walker on there. But I have the Metal Gear Solid Anthology Collection on the PlayStation 3. I have Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker because I have it on a disc. There's the Forza Horizon games on the Xbox. It's like they delist those after a certain amount of time. You can't even get I don't even know if you can get Forza Horizon 4 anymore. Certainly can't get 3, 2, or 1 on their storefronts, but you can still buy the disc. There was that game that was on the PS3 that was kind of famous. It was like Spec Ops: The Line, right? That was like a kind of well received game. That was like a soldier game, but it was a lot more sort of focused on the horrors of war or whatever. Got delisted. Can't get it on storefronts today, but you can buy the physical disc. So there's no debate about it that physical games offer better preservation. You can buy games today. I can go, I've been in my spare time. Sometimes I read some of the old issues of Game Informer because they've gone back and they put up digital versions of their entire back catalog. Well, I can go read about a game that came out on the PlayStation 1 in 1996. I can go on the internet, go on eBay, buy it, and play it today on my PlayStation 1 or 3 or 2. As long as the disc is there, it's an experience you can have. I can still put my Nintendo 64 games in my Nintendo 64 and they'll run. So, and that's in contrast to games that are getting delisted all the time, and it's increasingly becoming common. So if it exists on a disc or on a cartridge, you can go and you can buy it. Um, if not, you can't. Even something like a more modern example with Nintendo, like remember the Super Mario 3D All Stars. Now you're gonna pay a premium because it only exists physically, but you can still buy that cartridge if you can find it out in the wild. You cannot buy it on the digital storefront that delisted it. So PlayStation has historically been better about that than some of the other competitors, I will admit. But in a lot of cases, it's down to third party decision, right? Like Spec Ops: The Line was delisted from their PlayStation 3 store. That wasn't their decision, but it was the publisher's decision, whoever the publisher of that game was. And so it was taken down from their store. Same thing for The Crew, of course, which is a very famous case that sort of launched the Stop Killing Games org. But especially when it's an issue that seems like it's getting worse. It's an issue that's not entirely up to PlayStation, which, to be fair, to give them credit, I think they have been better about it than Xbox and Nintendo. But it's something that there's no guarantee that any game that you get on there is gonna stay. If you buy it already, uh, on paper, you'll still be able to download it, right? But say you don't buy it, say you miss the buy window. Well, it's a digital console. You've missed it. That's it. Whereas maybe you missed the crew or you missed, well, I guess the crew, it doesn't work at all, but you miss Spec Ops: The Line or whatever. You can still buy the PS3 disc. I've done it myself. Buy the PS3 disc, you own the game. Can't do that on if you don't have physical discs. That was a big part of like what limited running those companies were about. Is like if these games get delisted, at least we'll be able to we'll have copies that exist. You know, but you're losing out on that if it's all digital. Number two, I put it down as you have the potential to lose your quote unquote purchases, but I actually just rephrase it as you will eventually lose your purchases, your quote unquote purchases, because when you buy games digitally, you do not actually own those games. You are purchasing a license that can be revoked at any time. It's in the EULA agreements. And today, I see a lot of people say, well, they haven't done that to this day. There's games I bought on my PlayStation 3 in 2007, and I'll still be able to, I can still re-download them, right? Okay, that's true. However, in the announcement that they made, and I want to make another probably episode talking about the closure of the PS3 and the Vita stores, but in that announcement, they said you will be able to re-download these games even after the stores are closed for the foreseeable future, which means they're directly confirming not forever, right? They're not saying, yeah, eventually, yeah, or forever you'll be able to download these games. They're saying for the foreseeable future. Uh, Nintendo said the same thing about the 3DS store when they closed it. Yeah, they have not revoked that right yet. But you got to imagine the other shoe is going to drop. They've told you as much. It's not forever. Eventually, you will lose these purchases. And we've already seen that happen with other mediums. So Sony themselves just delisted a bunch of movies from their now defunct system where you could buy movies on their platform. Now, movies are different than video games, which yeah, I see people say that, and that is true. Movies have more licensing to go through, but when they tell you it's not going to be forever, believe them. It's not going to be forever. I'm now living with the realization that anything that I bought on the PlayStation 3 or the Vita or the 3DS, which is a lot of things, eventually I'm going to lose those. And of course, that's going to be the case in the future with the PlayStation 4, the PlayStation 5, and of course, ultimately, the PlayStation 6. So you're going to buy money. These games aren't getting any cheaper. If anything, they're going to get more expensive, and you don't even own the games. Whereas I can go back and I have a PS1 collection here behind me. I can go back and play my original copy of Spyro Year of the Dragon. I could go put that in my PlayStation 3 right now. It'll work. I know that because I did it last year. And so like there's this whole thing about, well, physical doesn't really preserve them either because there's like disc rot and things of that nature. And yeah, that can happen. But even then it's like, well, great, because you have other at least you have other you can go buy another copy. If you lose your digital purchase and they're not letting you re-download it, that's it. There's nothing you can do except for hope that maybe there's some legislation that passes that makes that illegal. That's literally the only thing that you can hope for at that point. And that's putting a lot of trust in elected officials who are pretty much worthless, I'm sorry to say. That's number two. Number one, the worst thing about this decision going all digital is it will lock players of the PlayStation 6 and onward into a monopolized game store owned and controlled by Sony and by PlayStation. So already I've pointed out issues with the PlayStation Store. No resells, no refunds, no gifts. Eventually you'll lose your purchases. Games could get delisted. But there are sales, right? In the current version of the PlayStation Store, you can get games on sale. But who's to say that they're going to continue to do those sales? Once they have everybody locked into the same storefront, they're no longer having to compete with physical game retailers. So what's the incentive to make games any cheaper? It's like, well, you bought this console, you're gonna have to buy some games eventually. So we'll just keep everything at the max price. It's kind of the Nintendo model. Um, and like people just seem to lack the foresight about that. I pulled up a list here. Here's some major PlayStation 5 games. What they're sold for on the PlayStation Store when there's not a sale, which is most of the time, and what they're retailing for on other outlets. Astro Bot came out in 2024. $60 still on the PlayStation Store, still full price. Amazon, you can get it for 40. Best Buy, you get it for 50. Walmart, you get it for 40. These are new copies. This is before, you can get them even cheaper, of course. You get them used. Death Stranding 2 on the Beach came out last year. $70 on the PlayStation Store, 55 on Amazon, 58 on Best Buy, 50 at Walmart, new copies. Demon Souls came out in 2020. 6 years ago almost. $70 on the PlayStation Store, $38 on Amazon, $41 at Best Buy, $40 at Walmart, new copies. God of War Ragnarok from 2022, $70 on the US on the PlayStation Store, $33 at Amazon, $35 at Best Buy, $29 at Walmart. Marvel Spider-Man 2, $70 on the PlayStation Store, $45 at Amazon, $41 at Best Buy, $32 at Walmart. And the list goes on and on. You get the same thing for Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, Last of Us Part 1. Goes on and on. So that's how it is now. It's already, you're getting way better prices physically, unless you wait for a sale on digital, which they're incentivized to do because they're getting beaten by these physical prices. And this is only Amazon, Best Buy, and Walmart. That's not even factoring in Target. It's not factoring in GameStop. It's not factoring in all the other retailers that you go to, Game Exchange, whatever. If they eliminate that competition, what incentive do they have to give you these sales? They can try to get you to spend $70, $60. It's like Nintendo. They don't put their games on sale. For that they do, they might discount them by $15, $20 at most. And so, and even physical copies of PlayStation of Nintendo consoles are harder to find at more acceptable prices. But at least they have that. That gives them a little bit of pressure. PlayStation will have no pressure at all to incentivize these sales. They could eliminate sales. Who's stopping them? And you say, well, people just won't buy games. Well, that's probably true. So it's a bad decision for them as well. But it also is it yet another reason to not buy the new console, which is already going to be $1,000. So you have total monopoly by PlayStation in the PlayStation Store. I think that's the number one most negative thing about this decision because that impacts everybody. Even if you're somebody that's been all digital since the PlayStation 4, you whether you realize it or not, you have benefited from the competition of the physical market because that has incentivized Sony to run sales or discount games over time. And they're already exploring this whole concept of I forget the term for it, but basically pricing games differently based on who it is. So right now it's only discounts. So they can discount games a little bit based on uh, your activity, I guess, on your account. But who's to say they don't do that in a dynamic pricing? That's what they call it. Who's to say they don't do that in the other direction? Oh, well, maybe we've seen that you're willing to shell out for us. Maybe we increase the price for this game. What are you going to do about it? You can't go anywhere else. So, again, without legislative intervention, there is nothing preventing Sony from doing any of these things. Every consumer will be negatively impacted if you're in the PlayStation ecosystem, whether you realize it or not. And I know there's a lot of dumb people out there that don't realize it, but there's a lot of fools in the world this morning. As my old college professor, Dr. Bridges, once said. So, what's the impact of all of this? What is the outlook for the PlayStation 6 based on this information? Well, even before we found out about the killing of the disc games, I already thought the outlook for the PlayStation 6 was very bleak because even though I've been very pleased with my time with the PlayStation 5, a lot of people haven't. And you start say that's already going to make the PlayStation 6 a harder sell if you bought something expensive from this company previously and you weren't satisfied with it. Why would you buy something else from them? So that's a negative. Now they're going to be dealing with these super high prices with the AI RAM shortage and all that, unless something dramatic changes in the next year or two, which is certainly good. As it stands right now, that's what we're looking at. And then they've already said not willing to significantly subsidize that or sell hardware at a loss. So these are going to be very expensive consoles. And now you're taking away features, especially this feature that I've just given you 10 reasons will dramatically harm the consumer experience of your product. I think the PlayStation 6 is set up to fail and fail miserably. The closest thing the PlayStation has had to a failure, other than the Vita, which was a failure, was the PlayStation 3. The PlayStation 3 still beat the Xbox 360, which is by far the most successful Xbox. Now we're looking at a situation where even the next Xbox would be more consumer friendly, assuming that they're getting rid of digital or physical discs as well, which I'm sure they are. Um, this whole idea of them, the rumor is that they're going to be able to. I think they've even said outright that you're going to be able to have different storefronts on that console. So they're going to completely eliminate this monopoly issue because they will allow third-party storefronts. That's the same thing that you have whenever you go on a PC. Yeah, everything's digital, but you have multiple storefronts, and so that incentivizes the different storefronts to run sales. Um, so Xbox has that, will have that advantage over PlayStation, which will be completely locked into one storefront. So I already don't think that I'm going to be interested in buying an next-gen console, which I'm going to be able to explain why in a second. But even if I was, that would give a huge advantage to Xbox. If I'm able to buy games on Steam on Xbox, well, Steam runs way better sales, so I'll take that. That's a much better deal for me as a consumer. Plus, I have an expanded library. I have the ability to play all these Steam games, which is obviously much more expensive than any storefront that exists today. So, and then Nintendo's still doing physical games, so that means that PlayStation's last in the consumer rights category in terms of the costs and the prices. It's like maybe you think, well, maybe their first party studios are going to save them. Well, maybe not, because the output what we've seen from them this generation has been very limited, right? And who's to say that those games that they make are going to actually be on the PlayStation 6 unless they're exclusive to the PlayStation 6 unless it's mandated by Sony. But going from the PS4 to PS5, which PS5 had a pretty good install base, still by 2022, Ragnarok was still coming out on PS4. You know, so obviously there was a lengthy cross-gen period between PS4 and PS5. Well, I think that if the PlayStation 6 does fail, which is my prediction, I think the adoption rate is going to be extremely low based on all of these factors that I've laid out for you today. That means that developers will be incentivized to continue making games on the PlayStation 5 because that's where the install base is. That's where the players are. You can't sell games to players on a box that they don't own. And so that incentivizes the PlayStation 5 cross-gen period to be significantly longer, maybe even indefinite, going into the PlayStation 6 era. And so in that sense, the PlayStation 5 continues to be the console of record. And so every major game coming out is still available on the PlayStation 5. So what incentive is there to buy a PS6 anyway? If all the games are already coming out on PS5. You're taking away the incentives that people would otherwise utilize to buy your console. Okay, yeah, you got to spend new money on a console, but everything's coming with you. Or you'll have all these new perks. You're taking away perks. It's going to be even more expensive. And you think that people are going to adopt that console, even though that the games that they want to play are still available on the console they already own. I'm sorry, but that's not going to work out. That's not going to happen. And the short-sightedness of this decision is mind-boggling. It's made by people, these executives that have no idea how this industry works or how a consumer, or especially a video game consumer, thinks or makes purchasing decisions. And it's clear, and unless they change course, which people are saying that it doesn't seem like they're going to because they're already making changes at their factories or whatever, they are in for a disastrous launch of the next generation that I think will change the course of this industry forever, potentially irrevocably. It might already be irrevocable because you've already lost consumer trust by announcing this decision. So even if you went back on it, it's hard to say how much damage has already been done. I already, like I said, was on the fence about buying a PlayStation 6. Even if they said, okay, you know what, we were wrong, we're going to allow physical games to come back, I'm still not, you're still going to have to sell me on a PlayStation 6. But as it stands right now, I cannot fathom a world where I buy a PlayStation 6. And remember, that's why I gave you so much of my history about how tied to PlayStation I have been over the course of my life, and being somebody that was satisfied with the PlayStation 5 that got it on day one of the few, it seems, that were satisfied with that purchase. So if you lose me, I can only imagine who else you're losing. So I think the future of PlayStation and really the video game industry at large is looking very bleak. And I'm glad that I was able to sort of talk about with it all of those things with you, why I think that is here today on the podcast. So let me know what your thoughts are. I'm very curious to hear what if people have any differing opinions or just similar opinions, or different variations on these opinions. Let me know in the comments section. Or right into the podcast at ControlledBurnes with an ES at gmail.com. I'm really curious to hear what your thoughts are with everything going on right now. But that's it for ControlledBurnes this week. Hopefully we'll have some more upbeat episodes in the hopper going forward. But this is something that I really needed to get off my chest because I feel like a lot of the analysis has been limited on this too. I don't think anybody's been able to sort of like lay out all of the reasons why this is going to negatively impact you, even if you are a fully digital player. So hopefully I've been able to illustrate that. And if you learn something, or if you share this with somebody that needs an education on these things, then I'm doing the Lord's work. So thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one.